Hi, it's Ileana at Awakening Cosmic Reality Show, and today I have my friend Chloe with me. Welcome, Chloe.
Hi, Ileana. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you, Chloe?
Awesome, thanks.
So today we're going to be discussing some aspects about the higher self, the soul, and Chloe and I have known each other for a long time. We're best friends, we're healing practitioners, and Chloe will introduce herself and tell us a little bit about yourself, Chloe.
Thanks, Ileana. Hi, everybody. My name's Chloe, and I'm with Airlea Healing Services. I have a small business where I offer healing services such as Reiki energy healing, crystal healing. I offer psychic readings, tarot readings, past life readings, crystal healing, emotional freedom technique healing, just any kind of healing I can really learn about and get my hands on. Lots of different modalities. I really enjoy it. And yeah, it might be interesting for you folks to know that Ileana and I have known each other since 2012. And a lot of the training that we've had over the years has been from the same teachers, actually. We both trained with the same Reiki teacher initially. That's how we first met when we did our Reiki level 1 and Reiki level 2 together and hit it off right away. And then we ended up also training with a magical practitioner and psychic called Odin. And we learned a lot of wonderful things about manifestation. And we also learned about the spirit and the soul from him as well. And we also learned from a practitioner called Leonard Howell, who was a Métis shamanic practitioner. And Ileana did a full, was it 4 years that you studied with Leonard?
I studied for 3.5 years with him, and I did the first 3 levels of shamanism with him.
Yeah.
Then he created more levels, but unfortunately at that time I wasn't ready to take the next steps. I felt very comfortable with what I studied about nature, about the soul, doing hypnosis as well. Leonard helped me to learn how to do hypnosis, because with soul retrieval and past life retrieval and doing past life readings, it's very similar to hypnosis. So I was able to create my own hypnosis style from that. So his training really helped me with that, and to learn how to connect to the soul. If you ever feel like part of your soul is lost, soul retrieval is really good to bring everything back together emotionally, physically, and in health. So Chloe and I learned a lot from Leonard about that.
Yeah, Leonard was a lovely person, and I wanted to give a shout out to our teachers because they've given us so much knowledge and wisdom over the years, and it's given Ileana and I a huge amount of information to discuss and use for our respective healing practices as well. And I didn't do the full shamanic training with Leonard, but he did teach me about past lifetimes and trained me to be a past life reader. And as you were mentioning, he trained me in soul retrieval as well, which can be a very healing process as well. So from those teachers, I learned a lot about the soul, the spirit, the higher self, the lower self. So in this series, we'd like to do a short series of videos, or it could be a long series. We don't know yet. We're just sort of doing this as a casual conversation podcast sort of thing to provide some interesting information for all of you. And as Ileana was mentioning, we're going to start in this video by talking about the higher self and how it's different from the lower self, and also how you can access the higher self, how you can communicate with that part of yourself, and then what are some of the benefits, ways that you can use the higher self as well. And then we'll probably touch a little bit on the soul depending on if we have time. And then in future videos, we're going to get in more detail about the soul, how that's different from the spirit. And we'll talk about interesting topics like soul families, soulmates, twin flames, and where the soul resides, how you connect with it, and how that ties in with things like past lifetimes and soul retrieval and things like that. So it should be a really interesting discussion.
Mhm.
So I hope you all join us for the whole series.
Can we also touch on soul whispering a little bit? Because that's a special thing that you do.
Sure. You mean like communicating with the higher self, or when you're doing like psychic transference?
Psychic transference. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's a really interesting concept as well. That, yeah, we can definitely talk about that later for sure.
Awesome.
Cool. So to start out with, basically the higher self uh, is sort of the higher self and the lower self. You can start by thinking of the two as connected with different chakras. So, but I first have to say that um, although the higher self is generally considered connected with the heart chakra and above, and we often, when we connect with the higher self, we're often connecting from this upper area of the self, and the lower self is considered sort of the solar plexus chakra and below, down to the earth. When we talk about these concepts like higher self and lower self, another thing that came to mind is the concept of the law of polarity. So it's a hermetic law. The law of polarity is really just that within everything there are opposites. So you have the higher self, you have the lower self, you have dark, you have light, you have male, you have female, good, evil, and so on. So when we talk about things in polarities like the higher self and the lower self, I think it's important to understand that when we talk about things as if they are opposites, it's really just so that we can have a conversation about them. So if we're having an abstract conversation, if it's intellectual, spiritual, or metaphysical in nature, we need to be able to define the different terms. And sometimes it shows up as two different sides. But one of the reasons for understanding the law of polarity is to understand that even though there are these perceived opposites in every aspect of our reality, our human reality, that we only use those opposites to be able to define them, to classify them, to compartmentalize them and discuss them. But in fact, when we kind of awaken more spiritually, we realize that everything is one. So things like the higher self and the lower self are just two sides of the same coin, dark and light, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that makes sense. Feel free to, ask questions if you need clarification on that. But generally speaking, when we connect with the higher self, we're connecting with the higher chakras. So when we're connecting, like when Ileana and I are doing our psychic readings, we're often connecting with sort of the third eye and the crown chakra and above to the higher self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then oftentimes when we're connecting with the lower self, we're connecting with the lower parts of the body, which is more the emotion and the physicality, the instinct and the drive and the will and those kinds of things, which is more connected to the ego. And when we connect to the higher self, we're connecting more with the soul, the heart, the spirit, and so on. So to understand the higher self, it's helpful to kind of understand what is the lower self, okay? And again, it's not really a hierarchy. It's not like the higher self is a better person than the lower self. They're just different aspects of the self, and everything is ultimately integrated. So those of us who are healers, who are intuitives, we often talk about holistic practices because everything is intertwined, right? The higher self, the lower self, the mind, the emotions, the body, the spirit, all of these things are interconnected. But when we discuss them, it can be helpful to talk about them as if they're separate, because then we can kind of understand the different functionality of those different parts of ourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, what I've discovered about my higher self is I have more than one of them. So I have two. Some people, there's the concept that they've said to me, the higher self doesn't have a name, doesn't have a gender. Sometimes that can come in for a person without a name and a gender. But sometimes for people, it comes in. Your higher self communicates with you as female or male, and it could have a name or it could be two higher selves. For me, I have two higher selves, and they came in at different aspects of my life in different times. So I didn't meet both of them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And one is Janaea, the other one is Miara, and they're both
Mm-hmm.
female. And they
Mm-hmm.
come from different lifetimes of mine, from
Mm-hmm.
past lives. And they're part of my oversoul, but they have their own connection to my past lives where they've had experiences with me or I've interacted with them. So the concept of the higher self is you could be connecting to your overall higher self, but you can also be connecting to aspects of your past life higher selves that are now connected to this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely. And it does begin to expand more and more as you become more practiced in connecting with the higher self. But what I just want to touch on before getting into some of those more in-depth matters of the higher self is, what is the lower self? So my understanding, and just so you know, I don't claim to be the ultimate authority on these things because these are metaphysical topics and they're mysterious, and these are just things that I've picked up from my training and from my personal experiences. But my understanding is that the lower self is connected more with the ego. So it's helpful, it's really helpful to know when the ego is communicating to you versus your higher self. So some examples of when the ego is communicating with you is when, for example, let's say we have, like in psychology, they talk about how a person can have an unbalanced ego. So a person can have either a deflated ego or an inflated ego. Ideally, we want to aim for being a secure person where we feel confident in ourselves. So our ego kind of represents our confidence level, but it also represents our desire to survive in a body. So the ego can be easily triggered by fear and desire. So for example, sometimes we think we want a certain material possession or a certain person in a relationship. We think we want it, but it's more attached to our ego self. So our ego self is more how we identify ourselves in the physical reality. So my ego self may identify as a healer. I'm also, a visual artist. I'm an empath. I'm a female, I'm a teacher, those kinds of things. Like, so our profession, our gender, our status, our position in society, all of these things are ego related. And again, it's not a bad thing. It just has to do with our lower aspects of ourself, which have to do with our desire to exist in a physical body, our connection and our attachments to physical possessions and people. And so it's important to understand when that voice of the ego is coming through, because if we're trying to make an important decision in life and it's the ego that's answering the question, it's not the higher self. So how can we tell the difference? Well, one of the things, Ileana and I learned in our training as psychics, because we both did a full psychic training program, was to use different parts of the body to sense where the information is coming from. So I mentioned earlier that, the higher self is a little bit more connected to the higher chakras. The lower self is connected more with the lower chakras. So sometimes, let's say you're in a park and it's dark outside and there's a creepy energy, or somebody is around you that you don't feel good. You'd usually feel that more like in your gut, right? In your stomach area. Although different people, and Ileana has talked about this, I know in some of her videos, different people have different psychic abilities. So they could, hear things, see things, sense things more in their body. But the lower self tends to kind of sense things more physically, whereas the higher self tends to usually get messages from either, our own higher self, which is really, the higher self is really sort of the wisest, most enlightened aspect of ourselves. It's a non-emotional self. It's connected with our spirit, okay? And I believe that even when we pass on and we're no longer in a physical body, the higher self is connected to that spirit aspect, and that continues on because that's just the energy of the self. Another great way that I've heard of delineating between the higher self and the lower self is the way that Eckhart Tolle talks about it. You're familiar with Eckhart Tolle's work, and a lot of people might not know him by name, but you might remember people talk about being in the moment, being in the now, being in the present moment. So Eckhart Tolle brought some of these Eastern concepts from Buddhism about the ego versus the spirit self or the higher self. And a lot of these things, like I say, they came from Buddhism and other religious or spiritual. Buddhism's technically not a religion, but other spiritual practices have this concept as well as part of their understanding. And the way that Eckhart Tolle described it really made sense to me, because he said, we're not our thoughts, we're not even our emotions, we are spirit, basically. So when we, and also I heard Sadhguru talk about this really well, where he does this meditation where you just repeat over and over, I am not the mind, I'm not even the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not even the body. So by repeating that mantra over and over, and by relaxing and shutting down, you know, the mind thoughts and even the emotions to us, and even the sensations in the body, it then begs the question, so if I'm not the mind, I'm not the emotions, I'm not even the body, what am I? So what is left? The only thing that's really left is spirit. So that's when we can begin to connect to our higher self. Another thing that we learned from one of our teachers is to activate this area by rubbing the third eye, you know, and you can do mantras and things like that too. You can do chants. You can rub a crystal here. Ileana taught me some amazing stuff about crystal healing. You can awaken that area with crystals. You can, you know, get Reiki to kind of open the crown, or you can even do movements like this with a pendulum or your hand to open up this area. Breath work also really helps too. And sort of the key way to connect with the higher self is to use a combination of meditation and breath work and visualization. So, you know, what Ileana and I learned from our shamanic teacher is how to go into a meditative state and go into the sacred forest, and then connect with, you know, our angel guides, spirit guides, our higher self. And that way we can also, on that astral plane, which is again the higher plane that we go to whenever we go to sleep at night, and we go there when we go into a deep meditation, we go on to this higher level plane, and then we're able to communicate to the higher self. So the tricky part when you're beginning opening up to your higher self and ultimately, you know, developing your psychic abilities, because that's what is really necessary when you're really opening your third eye, opening your crown, and connecting to your more psychic, intuitive self. You are basically needing to just kind of clear out all of the other clutter, anything else that's, you know, emotion, thought patterns, things of that nature, and go into that space of visualization, and then just trust whatever kind of floats in from your imagination. So if you're in your sacred forest, for example, and the first thing you see is a rabbit, then that could be an aspect of your spirit animal, which is also, you could say it's another aspect of the higher self too, because like from a psychological perspective, if we're just reflecting within and communicating to these different beings or entities, you could say we're communicating with other entities, or you could say we're just communicating with the higher self too, because it's also a reflection of our own superconscious, right?
Mhm.
So that's also an important term to define too, that we learn from our manifestation classes, is the difference between the superconscious mind, the conscious mind, and the subconscious. So the subconscious is more connected with the emotions, with the impulses, the fears, the desires, the physical body. So again, that's more in the lower part of the body. The conscious mind is connected with the ego. So I know I said lower self is connected with lower part, but also the ego is connected with the mind thoughts. But it's important to also differentiate like which aspect of the mind it is. So the conscious mind is more the frontal mind. So that's kind of the mind that we use in our day-to-day, like scheduling, mathematics, strategizing, logic, reasoning. It's more our day-to-day kind of consciousness in the Western world, at least, right? You know, Ileana and I are often in those other states, subconscious, superconscious, and whatnot. But most people are usually in the conscious level of mind, because that's what we're trained to do. We're not really taught about the subconscious unless we studied, you know, Freud or psychology or other things like that.
Mm.
And then the superconscious is sort of the consciousness that is up above here, which is again connected more with the idea of the higher self.
Yeah, and when you're connecting to your higher self, it's important to be grounded and balanced. So if you feel sick, if you're feeling emotionally ungrounded, you might have a harder time connecting. So you want to be as healthy as you can. You want to be as grounded as you can without the ego, without the bias coming in, and stay humble. Humble, being just open-minded and humble. You're not expecting the world when you go to meet your higher self. You're just opening yourself up to the possibility of your higher self coming in to do a meet and greet. That you don't put up high expectations in the beginning, because it's about your soul journey discovery of who your higher self is. There's also a difference between your soul name and your higher self name. Those are two totally different things. Your higher self might have one name and be one gender. Your soul name could be different and have a different gender depending on what you're connecting to in this lifetime. So, and sometimes the soul, past lives come in different souls, and you meet different souls. So distinguishing between the higher self coming in and the different soul aspects as well, because they're different things. So that's something else to ask whoever comes in, right? Ask them, are you my higher self, or are you my aspect of my soul self? Because there's a difference between that.
Yes, yeah, I agree. There are subtle differences with all of these things, and I'm really glad you brought up about how it's important to ground yourself before you connect with your higher self. And this again ties into what I was saying earlier about looking at things more holistically. Oftentimes when people venture on a spiritual path, when they begin on their spiritual path, they begin meditating, having these explosive, you know, chakra awakenings where they're feeling ecstatic and they just want to meditate all day and sit with crystals all day. And hey, you know, I don't judge. It's a wonderful experience going into the higher self, the higher realms, the astral, you know, communicating with celestial beings like the angels, other spirits, and things like that can be wonderful, truly an incredible, enlightening experience. However, again, sometimes people forget that the lower self is also very important here. We need to be grounded. So as I mentioned before, it's, you know, connected to the lower part of the body. So what can really be really helpful is whenever you start a meditation and you intend to either talk to your higher self, a past life, someone else's higher self, or another spirit or angel or what have you, what I like to do to ground myself is to visualize energetic roots coming down from the base of my root chakra and from the base of my feet, or either or. And imagine you're like a tree that's just planting roots into the earth. I know a lot of other healers use this visualization. It's very helpful to send your energy down into the earth, right? And I also study, I've been practicing Qigong for 4 years, which is a mode of, it's a medical martial art where we use things like visualization, breath work, and the movement of the energy through the body. And one of the things that we do in a lot of martial arts, because I've studied a few, is we begin always with grounding, always with grounding. So sending your energy into the earth as you breathe out, and then as you breathe in, like in Qigong, we say breathe in green, clean energy from Mother Earth flowing up the feet, and then into the heart, and then throughout the cells of the body. And then it helps you to feel safe, feel comfortable, feel grounded and connected to the physical earth. Because even though we are divine spirit in a physical body, we do have a physical body, and we need to really nurture that body, connect with that body through breath work, through visualizing our connection to the earth, to, you know, the trees, the plants, nature, the elementals of the planet, so the earth, the air, the fire, the water, connecting with those elementals and connecting with the earth. And then once we feel safe and comfortable and grounded, then we're more likely to have a positive experience when we connect with the higher self. Because when you're journeying in the astral, when you're meditating, and a lot of people, by the way, you know, are on the astral when they're sleeping or meditating, they just don't realize it. But in order to have a really positive experience with that, we want to be grounded first, because it's almost like, you know, like our shamanic practitioner, he didn't use any psychotropic drugs or anything like that. And I'm not against that. It has its purpose with ritual and with journeying, connecting with the higher aspects of the self and so on. But how Ileana and I were taught is to just connect to those higher realms through the imagination, basically through the mind, and connecting to the astral in that way. So in a sense, by grounding yourself, you are ensuring that you have a good trip. Okay, because if you're ungrounded, what can happen with people who don't value the lower self, the physical body, and grounding, is they can get very kind of like as if they're very floaty. And you may have met other spiritual practitioners like this who are just seem a little bit cuckoo or a little bit unbalanced, where they just get so into all of the higher realm stuff that they forget about, you know, their taking care of themselves, their exercise, their stretches, their breath work, and all of the physical aspects. So again, although we talk about these things because they are different aspects of the self, they are interconnected, and it's important that we, you know, use our grounding and our breath work to really respect and nurture this physical vessel that we're in here as well.
Yes, and as well, when you're beginning to meditate, make sure your energy shield, the bubble, your electromagnetic frequency that is all around you, it comes from your chakras, it comes from your energy field around the body. Think of it as your rainbow body, because you have an energy, that's your auric field. Make sure that's grounded and balanced as well, that it's that all these layers of this auric field shield are protected in white, blue, purple light, or any other energetic light that is around you that you sense. Make sure that that shield is modulated correctly so it feels good and you're grounded in that. You do the breath work, you do the roots and the grounding, but you also need to do the shield. Make sure that shield is in good vibration and that your thoughts are positive. Because if you go with a positive intent, you will get a positive outcome from your journey in your experience. If you go in with a negative intent, you usually get a negative intent in what happens on a journey. So just try to be as positive as you can. And it's not being emotional, it's not being like chaotic. It has to be grounded emotion. It has to be very neutral emotion. It cannot be anything that you're thinking about problems or whatever is going on in life, it has to be all cleared away and grounded. It's just you and the quiet, positive emotion of feeling centered, of being confident, and being ready to start a new journey. Being open-minded to it. That's so important. Just keep an open mind. There's no too many expectations of this, this, and that. Leave the expectations at the door. Just come in with an open mind to try something, to journey and see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah, you bring up a really good point, because when we're connecting with the higher self, again, we're connecting with the very highest version of ourselves, the wisest, most reasonable aspect of ourselves. And this aspect, it knows, right? Whereas the ego thinks, it uses more of the thoughts, it uses the conditioning from society, from cultures, from family. It's all about, the ego is all about conditioned thought. It's about rules, following specific expectations. It's about, you know, our social connection to others, and it can be very defensive, you know, and reactive, the ego, whereas the higher self does not have, it's not really connected to emotion at all. The soul is, but not the higher self. This higher self is more connected to the spirit aspect of the self. So to connect with the higher self, we can't be starting out our meditation with feeling, you know, really emotional or something like that. So emotions are not a bad thing. It's part of being human, right? But we need to do the clearing work to clear out the negative emotions before we begin the higher self work. So a lot of times clients will come to me and they're like, you know, I really want to do some past life work, some soul retrieval, or I want to connect with my higher self, my spirit guides, or I want you to just give me really positive energy. So all of those things would be considered light work, which is more of the higher aspects, right? But the shadow work, the work, the healing work that's done with the lower aspects of the self is just as important. And oftentimes when people first come for healing, they need to do the lower work, the shadow work of healing, expressing, nurturing, and cleansing the negative emotions from the body, and healing trauma, right? And you know, bringing in essences like forgiveness, like Ho'oponopono, or doing things like emotional freedom technique, where we clear out the toxic energies that are stuck in the body because of blocked negative emotions. Again, shadow work, negative emotions, it's not negative. It's really what it is. And I learned this from another spiritual teacher, Lynn Brisden. She was a coach of mine, one of my first spiritual coaches. And the way that she expressed it is that the emotions are the soul's way of communicating to us what's really going on with us. So we need to first heed, especially if we're feeling like really intense negative emotions, we need to first heed those, clear those, and heal. And then when we're at a more neutral place, then we can do the higher work, or receive things like Reiki energy healing, different forms of energy healing, positive manifestations and things like that. So another analogy that I like to use is that a human being has, you know, an aura, right? So let's say this aura is like a jar of energy. And let's say, you know, we've been through some trauma in life, some abuse, some betrayal, heartache. You know, most people have gone through some of these things at some point. And those energies are still inside of the aura. And there's so much of those energies that the jar of energy, or the energy of the aura, is full. Okay. So when it's full of energy, we can't put, you know, light energy, or, you know, connect with our higher self and things like that, because it's too saturated in those other energies. So we first need to communicate with those aspects of the lower self, the soul, the emotions, nurture those aspects and clear them out. And also, we need to clear out the mind thoughts. So this is something Ileana and I learned as well, is that human beings, from day one, we are programmed with thought patterns. Okay, so some of the most common thought patterns that we're taught whether directly or indirectly, are that we're not good enough, or we're not lovable, or that there's something wrong with us, or that we don't belong with others, that we're alone, or that we don't want to be here, right? That's too tough, so we don't want to be here in this reality. So these are a lot of the very common, like, overarching thought patterns that human beings suffer from, that I've seen time and time again with my clients. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of those similar ones too, Ileana. And so we need to, whereas we need to nurture the emotions, we need to delete, like assertively just delete those negative thought patterns, because they're not actually connected to our higher self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times those negative thought patterns block us from connecting to our higher self, because basically, and they make us sick, because if we keep
Mm-hmm.
telling ourselves over and over these lies that we're not lovable and so on, it's not acknowledging the higher self. The higher self in spiritual truth is perfect. It's divine, and it is love. So to say that we're not lovable is to deny ourselves our true nature, which is love and spirit, right? So when we delete those negative thoughts, first of all, we have to become aware of the thoughts, right? So if we want to be able to differentiate these different aspects of the self, the first step with spiritual awakening is awareness. So every day, a practice that you can do is just become more consciously aware of your day-to-day thoughts. If you're looking in the mirror, are you telling yourself things that are damaging your self-image? Are other people around you criticizing you or saying very negative things about themselves that are influencing your thoughts? Because a lot of times our parents, our friends, they say a lot of their negative thought patterns out loud,
Mm-hmm.
like about their age, their weight, different things that they perceive as being wrong with them. And then that affects our thoughts, and we absorb these thoughts from other people. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that even though we are all, like, every human being is created unique, each one of us has we have our own special features, our own personality, our own gifts. We're completely unique. And yet, again, law of polarity, we are at the same time all the same and all one and all connected to this larger energies, right? So we have these larger, we have our own individual superconscious, conscious, and subconscious, but then we have the collective superconscious, conscious, and subconscious as well. And because we are all sentient beings that are all connected energetically, we can tune into the frequency of certain thought patterns. So when a thought pattern comes up for us, like one of the most common ones is just not being enough, right? Never being enough, or something like that. When we tune into that frequency, it's like tuning into a radio station. And the more we tune into it, because of the way the brain works scientifically, is that it works on autopilot. So the more we tune into the same thoughts, it's very easy for us to tune it into it again and again and again, and we do it, and it becomes a habit, right? So every
Yeah.
day, become aware of your thoughts. And the process that I use is I reject these negative thoughts, and then I bring in some positive affirmations, or I work gradually towards it. Like I might say something like, for example, the thought pattern around not being enough, I might say, even though sometimes I used to feel, using the past tense to start out with, I used to feel that I wasn't enough because I was taught that type of thinking from my parents or whoever. I now trust that I'm not only enough, but I'm beautiful, I'm a good person, I'm lovable. And this is where you want to really start talking about some of the things that you really like about yourself, to reprogram this. And then when you do this work, it really helps, again, like I say, to clear out that clutter, that daily mental conscious mind, mind programming and clutter. And it really is, it's just programming and conditioning. So that's why it's important to not value those kinds of thoughts, because if you choose to connect in too strongly with those kinds of thought patterns, then that will become your reality. That's what you will manifest, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if you reject those thoughts and choose more positive thoughts, it allows you to more easily open up and connect with your higher self. Does that make
Exactly.
sense?
Yeah, it does. And also, sometimes what happens is self-negative talk. People play out a role, they talk to themselves in a negative manner. I am this, I am that, I'm not good enough, but you are good enough. So when you talk to yourself, you're talking to your own reflection of who you are, and say, I'm a positive human being. No one can interfere with me, not my family. Whatever they're saying about me is not true. That is not a true aspect of who I am. When you're
Mhm,
doing that self-talk, don't do
mhm,
it in a negative way. Try to
mhm,
focus on the good things about who
mhm,
you are and what the positives are.
mhm,
Positive self-talk, like
mhm,
literally talk to yourself positively when you're having a conversation with yourself, because it is literally a conversation with you. You are
mhm,
talking to yourself, and that's good talk therapy.
mhm,
It's so invaluable because your subconsciousness is an aspect of yourself that brings a reflection to you of what's going on in your life. That's what the self-talk helps with, to figure out a problem or a situation. Before you actually go to talk to somebody else, you're playing it out behind the scenes with yourself, so that when you do go have that talk with somebody else, it's positive and not negative, because
mhm,
you yourself have worked it out already,
mhm,
and you already know what's going to happen. As well,
mhm,
sometimes people like saying, oh, I have entity attachments, I have demons, it's so dark, it's so dark. I'm like, most of the time it's just negative aspects of the shadow self, of you having the thought patterns. It's not
mhm,
entities or demons. It's very
mhm,
hard for entities or demons to infest us, to get
mhm,
into our body. It's our thought patterns that often create the idea of entities, because
mhm,
entities are attracted to very negative thinking patterns.
mhm,
So if a person is super negative, yes, they can attract entities, and they will come towards that negative layered energy that's around
mhm,
your soul field, that's in your body. So be careful, clear the thought patterns, clear the negativity, understand what we create in this world comes from our mind. We physically manifest what we create. It comes from the mind, it comes from the deep subconsciousness. So be aware of this. What you create in your mind is what you manifest physically. That can happen. Careful
mhm,
what you wish for, or you just might
mhm.
get it.
Exactly. So a lot of people are familiar with the concept of the law of attraction. But actually, the law of attraction is just a part of the law of correspondence. So, but ultimately, like you say, what we think, and this again is another hermetic law in metaphysics, is the law of mentalism. So all is mind, and so we are creator beings, and we create with our thoughts and our words. So be very careful what you think and what you say, because that's what you will project out into the universe, and that's what will come back to you. So, and how do you know if a negative thought about you isn't true? Well, let me use a more extreme example. If I was to say to myself right now, my name is Fred, just try and say that to yourself. My name is something that isn't your name, and see how that resonates with you. It doesn't feel good in the body. It doesn't feel good in the consciousness. Why? Because it's not true, right? It's like, so if we tell ourselves that we're hateful or ugly or something else, it's going to feel very sickening within the self because it's not true. Whereas when we say to ourselves things like, I am loved, I love myself, I'm a good person, and this isn't really about judgment or anything like that. It's just, again, acknowledging that the higher self is a pure, good aspect of the self. When we acknowledge that, then we can begin to heal, and we can begin to feel good again with our own skin, within our own skin, when we get rid of those old judgments and programs that aren't true. They're not divine truth, so they're not true, right?
Yeah, exactly. And people sometimes say, I'm infested with entities. I have demons. Demons are here.
Mhm,
That's your negative thoughts coming up
mhm, mhm.
again.
Now, yeah, and it isn't to say that like there aren't any negative entities out there, but like you say, it begins with negative thought patterns. These experiences of psychic attack or demon possession or entity attachment, things of that nature, with which Ileana and I have both studied and worked with our clients with many times. All of these things begin with negative thought patterns, which then trigger negative emotions, which flood the body with toxic, hormones and chemicals and experiences. Because again, when we use our mind and our thoughts, it's a very, very powerful tool for manifestation. So then we create that in our reality. But like you said, when we are free of that, when we do the healing work on ourselves, then we can begin to connect with the higher level emotions like joy and gratitude and love and enlightenment and all of these things. But we cannot connect to those higher vibrational emotions until we've cleared the lower vibrational thoughts and lower vibrational emotions. And again, we talk about lower self, lower vibrational. It's not negative. It's all communicating things to us that we need to understand about ourselves for our healing. And we'll talk about that more in our next video when we talk about the soul, because the soul, I believe, has a specific purpose to learn valuable soul lessons. And one of those things is to experience different challenges in relationships and with emotions, and to heal those emotions. So we're doing a very valuable service for ourselves when we work through these things. And it can be very liberating and wonderful when we finally are able to get through it, even though it can be a very unpleasant experience sometimes working through things of negative emotions, past lifetimes where our soul was, in turmoil, things of that nature can be very challenging when we're going through it. But when we get through it, it can feel wonderful, and we can finally connect with those higher aspects of the self. But it requires, maintenance as well. So I wanted to just, before we close the video, I just wanted to touch on some of the aspects of the higher self in terms of like the benefits of connecting with the higher self, why that can be really helpful, and how, Ileana and I use it in our work, and then touch on a little bit on the soul and what we're going to talk about in the next video. Does that sound good?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Awesome. So one of the ways that I work with my higher self is when I have an important decision that I need to make. So if I am deciding whether I want to move locations, whether I want to stay in a certain relationship or not, whether it be friendship, romantic, or what have you, or how I heal myself, if I have any health things that come up, whatever important decision I have to make, I make sure to communicate with my higher self, to ask my higher self questions about that. And I do that again through meditation, through deep breathing, because we need to cleanse the energy of the body before we go into our meditative state. And then I visualize my higher self. Let's say I'm in the sacred forest. I visualize my higher self sitting across from me. They could look just like me, or like with Ileana's experience, it could be a different looking person. It could be a different version of the higher self. Whatever works for you is fine, as long as it feels like the wisest part of yourself and not your ego. So a good way to know is if you think you're talking to the higher self and it's very emotional, reactive, judgmental, fearful, things of that nature, it's not your higher self. Your higher self will be very wise, very knowing, as if you're talking to an ascended master or a guru or a spiritual teacher, but it's you. It has to be, you have to know that it's you. Even if it looks a bit different than you, you'll know on a deep level that it's you and not another being. So that's important as well. And then when I'm with my higher self, after I, relaxed and connected, I then maybe ask my higher self these questions? You know, is it for my high? And when you ask your higher self questions, you can connect with your heart as well, if that helps. And again, your higher chakras, and ask yourself, is it for my highest good? Lead, instead of saying, should I move or should I stay in this relationship? Because it's not really about should or shouldn't. Again, that's an ego thing about what we should or shouldn't do. That's programming. That's not the highest self. So we ask our higher self, is it for my highest good to stay with this person? Or is it for my highest good to
Move.
whatever, right?
Mhm.
And then you open up your mind and you just allow the answer to float in. So it's a similar process that we do when we're connecting with past lifetimes as well, or spirit guides. We clear the mind, we open up the mind, and we do some breathing, and then we visualize the higher self or whatever being we're communicating with, and then we allow their answer to just gently float into the mind. And whatever floats in, it could be in a voice, in a sentence. You could see, they could send you just images of different things floating around, or it could be very, auditory, where you hear them talk to you. They communicate in different ways. It really depends on what your intuitive nature is. If you're more clairaudient, you'll hear the higher self speak to you. If you're more claircognizant, they'll just show you a knowing of what to do. Or if you're more clairvoyant, they'll give you visuals. They won't speak to you, but they'll give you visuals. And then what you need to do is put that together. And this is, again, how we do our psychic readings. We get these different bits of information, and we put it together in a little story or a little concept, and then we interpret that information that we get intuitively, and we do our best to apply it. And sometimes you may need to do this more than once. So especially if you're not practiced in communicating with your higher self, you want to probably ask, especially if it's a big decision, you want to probably ask at least a few times and over a longer period of time if you can, to see if it changes. And then you can also connect in with your heart and ask your heart as well, is it for my highest good? Especially with relationships, that's the aspect of the higher self you want to connect with, is your heart, and ask yourself if it's for your highest good to be in that relationship. And if it's more like psychic information, it might be more of the higher chakras. If it's more of a dangerous situation, it might be more the lower chakras, because they're there to kind of help you survive and protect yourself from harm. So so we use the higher self in things like decisions, as I mentioned. We also use the higher self when we're doing psychic readings. We communicate with the higher self on a regular basis to get information for clients. So we may use tools like tarot cards. We may use crystals. We may, use the higher self to as an avatar to communicate with other beings on the astral plane as well, like other spirit beings or angels or whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. And also, obviously, for healing, we use the higher self to get information about the client, where in the body they're having pain, what's going on with the thoughts, with the emotions. And so all of these things are really, really beneficial for you, because when you can communicate to your higher self, decision making will become a lot easier. You'll have more of a feeling of knowing, because the higher self doesn't think, it knows, right? And that can bring a great deal of confidence, because the mind thoughts can only calculate and process data. That's the conscious mind. But the superconscious is connected to the all-knowing, all the information. So as I was saying, the different levels of consciousness are connected to different pools of collective information among humanity. And then even the broader spectrum is, we're connected to the plants, the trees, the elements, the animals, and the whole shebang, even the galaxies, so there's, like you said, there's different layers and levels. And the more we connect with the higher self, we're able to connect even more broadly with all the sentient beings and all of the higher level beings and so on. So it's really wonderful. It's a wonderful experience, especially if you take the time to do some healing work on yourself, practice meditation, and ground yourself so that you feel comfortable with everything you're doing. So we would never, Ileana and I would never push anybody to do something that you're not ready for. So you always want to take baby steps with these things and slowly build up your comfortability with these things.
Yeah, my higher selves showed up in the last 3 years. So it's not as if I have been talking to my higher self since I was born. Some difficult things happened in my life. Some decisions that I made on my own weren't super great. And I acknowledge and own those decisions. I made them because certain things happened in life. I was in a hurry. Life happens. Sometimes we make decisions and then we're able to reflect on them later. So I made what I made, my choices. I didn't have my higher selves. I was not in the best mental state at the time. This is several years ago. Okay, I made them and then I cleaned it up. I unmade those decisions. Remember, if you make something happen that you're not happy with, you can undo it and fix it. Wisdom comes with learning, with age, with experience, having multiple experiences. So my higher selves showed up when I needed to find a different house to move. I was renting. So Janaea showed up. And what I'm going to use myself as an example here, I needed to live in a place where I can live, where I could also do my work from home, the psychic readings, the healings, hypnosis, soul retrieval, past life readings. So I needed a safe space where I could do this from home. So Janaea showed up and she helped me find a house. I saw 100 different houses and I went out and I physically did the work as well. But she helped me to focus on a specific, beautiful, safe space for me where I could live and do my work in a safe, balanced way. So she showed up just when I needed help with that. She showed up unexpectedly. I didn't expect her to come. I didn't ask for her. She just came in and she looks like me. The face looks similar, except she has blue hair and she sounds just like me. She has similar vibration to me. So her voice is similar to mine. And she's like, go look at that place. Go look at that beautiful, vibrant space. It will be perfect for you and everything. It checks off everything 100% on your happy list, where to live and where to work. That's what she said to me. She's like, it's going to feel good. Our higher selves always give us positive wisdom and advice. They don't ever give us negative stuff that will work against us. That's not your higher self. If they tell you to do something bad, your higher self will never do that. They're here to help and support you to make the right decisions in life and to help you. They're not here to hinder you or block you from anything. So it's very important to understand something's coming in that feels off vibrationally, doesn't feel like you, and it's telling you weird things that are not good for you. That's not the higher self. That is something else. That could be an imposter. That could be an entity or a being that doesn't have your highest good and your highest will. Best for you. So that's important to know. My higher self showed up when I needed the most help with something, with a life decision, a very important decision, because I was having a bit of a hard time finding a place to live where it checked off everything 100% on my list. Janaea helped me with that. And then Miara showed up 2 years later, and she helped me with some other wisdom concerning work, lifestyle balance, and health. So again, she helped me with things that I needed a higher perspective without bias, without emotion hindering my decisions. So she came in and helped me with that. And they both showed up without me meditating. They just both showed up when I really needed help because I was asking for higher divine help. And higher selves are higher divine beings as well, because they're a part of our soul. They're a part of our higher self. And when I do psychic readings, I connect to people's higher selves and their soul divine level of what their soul is, to the higher consciousness of them, not to the lower vibration. And that's how I do my psychic readings. I'm decent with tarot, but Chloe incorporates the tarot in her readings. I incorporate going deep on the soul level and the higher self. Chloe incorporates the tarot and soul aspects. So we're all different in what we do, but we do the same type of work. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's wonderful to have a like-minded soul to talk about these things, which can be a little abstract for some people. But I'm really glad that you touched on how the higher self never gives negative advice. And also that reminded me to talk a little bit about how some aspects of the soul can communicate to us what we need to do, and it may end up manifesting as what appears to be a negative experience, but it's also very important for our learning and our evolution. So for example, I've been in a couple of relationships, one in particular where my soul, an aspect of my soul, the past lifetime of my soul, wanted to be with this particular person very strongly, even though there were, my higher self and my intuition was like, this is going to be bad news. Probably a lot of people have had this experience too, right? Where there's different aspects of yourself competing. And it's difficult, it's very confusing to make a decision, because in your heart, you may be in love with them. In your soul, you may feel a strong physical attraction and a magnetism towards the person, which is how I felt. The heart and the magnetism was there, but then there were aspects of my intuition that were like, ooh, this is really, tricky territory here. And so I don't believe that we ever really make mistakes, because from a soul evolution perspective, even if we choose a partner or a situation that ends up manifesting in suffering and pain, there are important things that we need to learn from that experience as a soul. And I certainly know now why I experienced that relationship. And even though it wasn't from my higher self, it was from an aspect from the soul. So the soul could communicate to us positive connections, right? But it can also communicate, and this is how, Ileana and I became close, because we've had past lifetimes together where we were mermaids in Atlantis, and we've had, many lifetimes together where we've, been like soulmate friends, and we've been, connected. So it's almost like our brain is like, connected sometimes, because the way we think is so similar. But, so you'll feel in your heart and your soul connection with certain individuals, and a certain familiarity and affinity. And sometimes, you may have experienced this where you meet somebody and you don't know them, but right away you feel a connection and you feel a warmth and a comfortability. And oftentimes it is because that person is part of your soul family. I believe Ileana and I are part of the same soul family. And some people from your direct family could be, or it could be other people that you meet outside of that you're more drawn to than those people. Like your friends are more your soul family than your family is. It really depends, right? But ultimately, we don't really make mistakes. We just do our best, and we learn, right? And I do believe that's the ultimate purpose. As human beings, we're here to learn, and to learn, and by learning, we evolve, we expand the soul, we release our suffering, we help others to release suffering, and we move up into the higher vibrational realms, and we feel good, right? So another purpose of life, I think, is to feel good, which is one of the hardest things for a human being to do, because we have to clear away the trauma, the issues from past lifetimes, and all of these other things. But as we begin to learn and work through all of these different things, we can begin to feel more comfortable, more connected with our higher self, have more understanding and compassion for our soul, and to heal the different aspects of the soul. So unless there's anything else that you'd like to discuss, I think I'll just touch on a couple things we'll talk about in the next video. Is there
Yes.
anything else you wanted to discuss,
Yeah,
or?
I just wanted to mention that our higher selves help us to accomplish goals and achievements. They're
Mhm,
here to guide us with wisdom. They also help us to remove blockages,
mhm,
any energetic, physical blockages that can cause pain, emotional issues. They're like a mirror image to help us reflect on what has happened, what's yet to come, to work through that. And sometimes they guide us to prevent us from doing something that we shouldn't, on going down the wrong path. So they're always there to help,
mhm,
to help us to be on the best path and timeline that we can be on, the most positive thing, our best selves, our best version of ourselves, the best situation in life. They're here to help with positivity, to guide us on the most positive, healthy route that we can go. That's what the
mhm,
higher selves do,
mhm.
so that we go on a positive path, the best path of least resistance and least suffering. Hopefully,
Exactly, yeah.
hopefully no suffering at all, if we
Mhm,
can. They help with that.
mhm,
So it's the higher form of wisdom from the higher self, without the emotional traumatic issues.
mhm. Yeah, and so, we can use the higher self also, because you mentioned about how it can help us to be healthy. We can use the higher self to, ask our higher self what is for our highest good to be eating, because what we're eating and how much we're exercising, what we're doing for exercise are really, really key for health and for healing. A lot of people don't realize just how important those things are. And so, just as we can use the higher self to make big decisions, we can use the higher self to make little decisions too, about which supplements to take, whether we need to stay away from certain foods like refined sugars or wheat or whatever it might be that our body is not resonating with very well. And so, yeah, so it can definitely help us to be our optimal selves, our healthiest, happiest selves. And it helps to protect us from other people and beings that are not, for our highest good. And also, it helps us, as I was mentioning earlier, it helps us to communicate to other higher level beings as well. So for people that are open to, communicating with their guardian angels, to archangels, to ascended masters, gurus, devas, gods, goddesses, whatever it is that you feel comfortable with, um, to spirit guides, animal guides. When you're connected to your higher self, you can communicate with those higher level beings as well that are more residing in the astral. And these beings have a lot of wisdom as well, and a lot of understanding about life and reality that we can tap into. And the more we do it, the less we are dwelling in the ego self, which again, the ego causes a great deal of suffering, as we learn from Buddhism, attachment to physical things and people, and attachment to our status, money, all of those kinds of things um, trigger the ego, which causes suffering. And when we are free of that, and we understand that we're beings of spirit, it allows us to rise above that. And it's a very, very good feeling.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we are physical beings, um, it's good to know that we are divine beings as well, so that we're not so obsessed with things like material things, wealth, um, and even our attachments to other people. um, Sometimes we need to learn the art of detachment, and the higher self really understands a healthy level of detachment. It's operating from a healthy level of detachment, not in a cold way, but just in a way where we can connect with what's best for us.
Mm-hmm.
So unless there's anything else you want to discuss, I'm just going to touch on a few things that I'd like to talk about in the next video to get people interested in what we'll talk about next.
Yes, I did want to mention that sometimes the higher selves will show us future scenarios of events that can happen, like precognition. They do that. and they're showing us what the future could be. So it's like literally seeing video and audio of what your future looks like. And it's to show you what can be, what positive things and opportunities can happen to you. Our higher selves, the higher selves lead us to these opportunities. And I've had visions of where I've seen the future, like Janaea has shown me visions. She brings up the visions. Sometimes I see the future on my own, but a lot of the times she brings in the visions. And something actually happened to me where I got to do something really cool that she's envisioned for me for a long time. And you know what that is. Can't really discuss what it is because it was a phenomenal project to do. And I've seen it in visions multiple years. And it's finally happened because she showed me how it would look like, even how it would be. And I said to myself, does that resonate with me and how that event can look like? And it did. And I talked to you about it as well to get some advice and perspective. Like our higher selves can give us advice. Talk to your best friends too, because the ones that know you best can help you best as well. And as well, when you're getting to know your higher self, sometimes ask them, are you my higher self? If a being comes in, ask, are you my higher self? What's your name? How are you connected to me? That's the conversation you start with your higher self. If you want to know who your higher self is, there's multiple beings coming in. Ask them who they are to you individually. That's so important to connect with the vibration. Who or what are you connecting with? What is that being to you? Who is it? Are they from your past lives? Are they your soul divine connection, your soul name? Or are they your higher self? Are they your spirit guides, archangels? We need to differentiate who they are. Sometimes when they come in, they instantly introduce themselves, who they are to you, how they're connected. But sometimes they wait quietly and patiently for you to ask them who they are and how they're connected to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, the higher self is spirit. It's connected to spirit. So it's non-linear. It can be connected to any timeline. So you can see aspects of the higher self that are connected to past, present, or future timelines as well. So especially when we're doing, intuitive readings, it can be helpful because they can see that aspect of the self, can see potential futures. There's no one future for anybody. There's usually at least 2 or 3 paths, right? Whenever we do an intuitive reading, but it can basically give us the information as to where things are going, and give us a good indication of the potential of where things are going. And then we can course correct, right? We can look at, okay, well, if things aren't going optimally in this area, how can we navigate a little bit differently, change some of the things we're doing. And this is the other key thing with connecting with the higher self too, is we can't change, we can't always change what other people are doing or what's happening with things externally in the world, although we can impact them, because again, we are manifestors, we are creator beings, so we can manifest, we can influence the physical world, but we have a more limited control over that versus the control that we have over the inner self and the higher self. So when we work with the higher self and we heal the different aspects of the self, the lower self, conscious, higher self, and so on, we are doing not only a huge service to ourselves, because we're beginning to understand ourselves and therefore love ourselves, respect ourselves, and do what's for our highest good, but that good energy that we're giving ourselves is also rippling out exponentially to our clients, our friends, our family members, and so on and so on and so on. So if you can imagine, if everybody took the time to connect with their higher self, if everybody in the planet connected to their higher self and began to, awaken their higher wisdom, their intuition, began to reject some of the old negative programming and heal the negative emotions. Just imagine how how even more amazing, this is an amazing world, it's a beautiful world, but just imagine how much more wonderful it would be if everybody took the time to do that. And I do feel that we're on a path where more and more people are awakening, their higher aspects are awakening. And sometimes it takes challenging situations like health crises, whether they be personal or global, to awaken aspects of the self that were hidden from us. And when we do that work on ourselves, it's just incredible, the positive influence that we can have on not only ourselves but on others as well.
Mm-hmm. And the higher selves help us to be at our best, to reach our optimal timelines, to reach our optimal opportunities. And they help us guide us to not miss opportunities, to show up and be present for the signs and symbols we receive from the universe. Sometimes we may not notice the little things, but they will, and they'll bring it up to our attention to say, look, here's a wonderful opportunity that's coming up. Don't miss the signs and signals of it. Show up and be present to do the work. Because you'll be successful if you show up and do it. They're guiding us to show us opportunities that we might not notice, because they know already what's going to happen in our future from our past. They're everywhere, non-linear. They're in our past or present, near future, or the distant future. So they almost know what's going to happen. They actually do. They help guide us towards the best optimal point of how to get there and succeed with opportunities. They help us to find the opportunities, to listen, to hear, and to show up and be present for them.
Yeah, and to do that, we need to clear fear, because the ego is activated quite often by fear, and or whether the ego self gets hurt, the pride gets hurt, things like that. But yeah, oftentimes our higher self will be calling to us. Like, for example, you talked about how the higher self brings forth visions. As a visual artist, I get visions of things that I would like to paint, books that I want to write. All of these creative things come in through the higher self visions. And it's been very helpful for me to manifest things as a creative person. But the ego can get in the way sometimes, because the ego likes things to be familiar, because again, the ego wants for things to stay the same, because by doing things the same way, we were able to survive up until this point. So the ego wants us to continue on doing things exactly the same way so that no harm can come to us. But what the ego doesn't understand, because it's not as evolved in that way as the higher self, is that we can try new things and it be a positive thing. Even though it's intimidating to try new things, and we could procrastinate. And I know for me, I'm guilty of sometimes procrastinating on things that I know are visions from the higher self, because the ego comes in and goes, well, I don't know how to do it that well yet, or I don't know if I'll be good at it, or I don't know if people will like it. So the ego is always thinking about, how is it going to look to others? Am I going to look cool? Am I going to look stupid? The ego will kind of put these judgmental ideas and into our heads, because it doesn't want us to change, because ultimately it's trying to help us survive, which is a good thing. We need to survive in this body, but it can be overly active, the ego, because we're taught to think from this more conscious ego perspective. And so it's basically, the ego has been allowed to run rampant, especially in our Western world. And we need to rein it in and go, no, I'm going to overcome my fears. I'm going to try this new thing that my higher self has guided me to do. I'm going to, even though I don't feel confident, I'm going to try it. I'm going to do baby steps, and I'm going to manifest my goals that are, sent to me by my higher self. But it's not easy. A lot of us are blocked by the ego, and then that causes negative thoughts, which cause negative emotions, and then we feel overwhelmed, and then we just don't want to do anything. So we have to get out of this, and meditation helps. Getting some coaching, some healing helps. whatever you need to do to feel good and get to a neutral place again, and then you can begin to follow the guidance from the higher self.
Yeah, and ego is an interesting thing. Never underestimate it, because my ego is very confident. It's like, go do, go try new things, go experience. And it constantly throws me into new challenges, into new interesting things to do, like write a book. So like, how am I going to write a research archive book that I've never tried? Like, it's a totally different format from standard book writing. My ego said, go do it, jump. So I jumped, I took the leap, and my higher self, Janaea, showed up and said, write it like an archive, star date this, like in Star Trek, put the date, the time, the date, and write it as an archive. Just do a beautiful experience. One day you experience this, today, tomorrow you experience something new, write about it. That's the book. So Janaea said, oh, don't worry. Yeah, the ego is confident, but this is not about confidence. This is about doing a good quality work. Slow it down. Great idea. Slow it down. Think about it. And here's the format. Here's the new formula. So she gave me a vision of it. And once she gave me the vision and I slowed down, it started to form itself. So my ego was confident. It's like, go do it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a balanced ego, right? Which is what I was talking about at the beginning, is if we're secure in ourselves, we're confident enough to, try new things. But if the ego has been damaged by abuse, verbal, physical, or whatever, it can be challenging to feel confident and comfortable enough to try new things and do different things. So those are things we need to heal. But a good way of noticing the ego is through negative emotions. If pride comes up, if overconfidence comes up, if jealousy or reactiveness comes up, anger or is fear, especially, those are all signs that the ego is being triggered. Now, it's normal. We all have an ego and it does get triggered on a somewhat regular basis. So it's nothing wrong with you if that happens. It's just good to notice, what were the thoughts that you had when that emotion was triggered? Are they true? Are they just trickery? Because the ego is very slippery. It's very sneaky. It'll trick you. So sometimes you think you're going the right way, but it's actually the ego, and we can get overconfident. Sometimes we might be initially guided by the higher self to do something with work, and then we become a workaholic and we become prideful and overly push ourselves. And that's the ego that's telling us, you're only worthy if you are working hard on this project, or if you're working hard in general. And that's, again, another one of those overarching thought forms that's very prevalent, especially in Western society, is that you're only worthy if you're busy and productive. So we have to recognize, again, that's just the ego. It's not the higher self. And even though we may have been guided by the higher self to do important things, we don't want to get too big for our britches and too full of ourselves. We want to remain humble and also keep a nice balance, a nice work-life balance, and have proper self-care.
Yeah, and ask yourself, are you happy with what you're doing? Are you happy with it? Because
do you feel good throughout the process, or is there some suffering going on there? Because if there's suffering, then the ego is getting triggered again.
Yeah, or if you're angry or if you're frustrated, step back and have a look. Why are you frustrated and angry? What's the root cause that's causing this? Because oftentimes the body signals us with symptoms, but that's not the real root cause of what's really happening. So we have to go deep and have a look. What is the root cause of the situation, the issue, the medical thing, whatever it is? Sometimes it's not medical, sometimes it's a life thing, it's emotional, physical. Have a look. Why is the body signaling you with these symptoms? Because symptoms just mask. They're a signal to let you know something's not quite right. You're doing something weird with yourself. Go deep and look within yourself, deep in the soul. Just go within and ask yourself, why am I having these symptoms? What's causing this? What is the root cause? And wait for the answer. Just wait to hear it or see it, or however the thought, however it forms is the answer. Just let it organically come. The first thing that comes in is usually what it is, or the second, sometimes this is the third. And if you get a couple of things coming in, again, slow down and have a look at each portion, because it's part of the puzzle piece of what it is. We as psychics interpret things as puzzle pieces. There is a portion of the piece of the puzzle that connects to the next piece and opens up the key. And when you get the whole, you really see what's going on. So when you get a couple of things coming in, slow down and look at each piece and portion of the puzzle to fit it together to see what the root cause is.
Well, I feel like we could talk about this one topic all day. It's one of those topics that is very, very deep and broad, and like there's so many things we could talk about with this. I would be interested in, you know, if you have any viewers who have any questions about it, that might be interesting. But otherwise, is it okay to close here, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think we covered the most important portions about the higher self and some of the soul aspects that connect to the higher self. So I think it's we've given people the beginning, the middle, and what it is to be the higher self, how to connect, how to interact with it, and what the soul is and the spirit, how it's connected to the higher self, as well as with our protectors, guardians, spirit guides, archangels. They're part of that mixture as well. So I think we've covered a great topic for today.
Sounds good. So next time I'd like to talk about a little bit more about the soul, how it's a bit different from the spirit and the higher self, yet connected, and some of the experiences that the soul has, like soul families, you know, soulmates, twin flames, past lifetimes, and different things that the soul can go through, like the different sufferings of the soul, and then ways that you can connect with your soul and heal your soul so that you feel much better. Because I think this is really important work, especially as we are, you know, we're all eventually transitioning to spirit, you know, we're passing through death and going to the other side. So the more things that we can address with the soul and heal the soul, and again, the soul's way of communicating to us is through the emotions and through the physical body. So the more things we can address with that and learn about our soul, the more we can feel peaceful and comfortable with the transition that we all have to eventually make. So this is important work. And of course, you know, many people have many lifetimes, so it might take many lifetimes to address all of these different things that come up with the soul. But, you know, I just think the more we can learn, the better, because it gives us more tools to address these things and ultimately feel better, happier, and healthier as a being.
Yeah, and we can also talk about soul density and soul vibration, how we can raise soul density. Like if somebody vibrates on a scale of 1 to 10 on a 4 level density, you know, how you can raise that up higher to 5, 6 and up, how you can do this with healing vibration and also soul retrieval as well.
Yeah. I think the soul density one could be an interesting video just on its own to talk about life force energy, because life force energy is a really interesting concept that we learned about in our Reiki healing practices. And also I've learned some very interesting, mysterious things about life force energy, the life force energy we're given when we're born, and then how to replenish it, how to use it in different ways. So that's a really interesting topic. I wouldn't mind even just doing a whole video about that.
Yeah, and I think it'll be part of our series.
Sounds good.
Oh, thank you, Chloe. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Always wonderful to talk with you.
Yeah, that's what we do best. We chat.
Okay, thanks so much. Lots of love.
Bye.
Bye for now. Talk to you soon.
Bye.